Welcome to A Kind Life. Today I'm joined by Bailey. How are you going, Bailey?
Good, how are you?
Yeah, really well, thank you. I'm excited that we have finally got to chat. Well, just before we jumped on, I mentioned that I actually first learned about you through a previous guest, Catherine from New South Wales Hen Rescue. She wrote a book about like young activists and how to, I suppose I would like to say how to help the world go vegan. And you featured in that. So I'm really grateful that I learned about you and that you've joined us today. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate you having me on the podcast.
No, my absolute pleasure. So, for anyone who hasn't had that pleasure of reading your story, a little bit about yourself, tell us about yourself. And, I guess, first of all, actually, I want to say, how old are you?
I'm 20.
Awesome. And when you were featured in that book, a lot of your story was from a few years ago, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. So I think I was interviewed for that book at maybe 16 years old.
Yeah.
And a lot of the contents in there was about kind of starting out as an activist and how I kind of got into it, very quickly and very bravely and made kind of my presence known and heard in industries pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, couldn't agree. That's why I was really, yeah, just I suppose like quite motivated by what your story was in there. So yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I have done many protests and lots of advocacy, but not just protests. It's also been school curriculum things as well. So with Voiceless, they're really big on having schools actually adopt their teaching tools, and I got involved with that because they had noticed my protests that I'd done, including at 14 years old, going into a dolphin park in Coffs Harbour, which is the Dolphin Marine Conservation Park, which claims to be about conservation, but it's really keeping dolphins in tiny pools. And so I went in there and I disrupted the dolphin show alone, and I screamed, "It's not cute, it's cruel." And I held a banner of a dolphin trapped in a tank.
And what response did you get from the conservation park?
Well, the conservation park, they just surrounded me. And the dolphin trainers actually went onto their speakers and said, "We are so sorry for this disruption. We are going to be escorting him out as soon as possible." And then they had to rush actually to like the kind of like the head office type of thing that they have at the park to get somebody to take me out. But they were fuming, especially because I did this protest after the death of a baby dolphin. So they were already under a lot of controversy, and they were also under a lot of controversy for forcing a elderly dolphin in remission for cancer to perform tricks. And I also just think, in general, I think for a dolphin trainer to see a 14-year-old kid protest so bravely, it really shows that this industry is on its way out if kids don't want to go there. In fact, they want to protest there. So I think it was a really big moment in history for them to wake up that this is disgusting and vile, and my generation's not going to put up with it.
Yeah, it would have been such an impact to have, I know, actually, I did want to find out. I'm assuming that your disruption was after, Angela, her previous guest who's been on the podcast. She has done a number of disruptions. I'm guessing hers came first and yours followed.
I think Angela's protest came up first, but my disruption, I believe, came first. I believe I disrupted the show before Angela had actually disrupted. But there have also been previous other people who've disrupted the dolphin show there, chained themselves to the dolphin pool as well. I've heard of as well. So yeah, there's lots of people who are really vocal about shutting this facility down and all captive dolphin places.
Yeah. And so did you, were the police involved? Like what was the outcome of your disruption there?
They called the police and they just escorted me out. That's what happened. Yeah, they didn't want to press any charges or anything like that, and they couldn't because as soon as I was asked to leave, I made sure to leave the park immediately because I didn't want to get arrested, but I wanted to have my point come across. They also were very suspicious, actually, because when I was doing this protest, they were telling me to stop filming, and they were like, "You're not allowed to film our conversation," and all this stuff. So they were being quite intimidating as well.
Yeah. And so I'm assuming you're not banned, like you're not banned from that facility?
They have not given me any formal bannings, but I would really unlikely be accepted to go into the park. But you never know, maybe I will one day want to go back there and tell them what I'm thinking. But no, they haven't given me any formal ban, which is really strange because I protest there like all the time. So they have plenty of opportunities to do that. But I just think it's such a small park, they're going to recognise me instantly. Unless I dress up as a merman. I know Angela's dressed up as a mermaid before. So you never know.
And so from that, initial disruption, what else have you been involved in for, fighting for dolphins and other marine life being kept in captivity?
So, yeah, I've done lots of speeches about the dolphin captivity issues, but I've also been involved in greyhound racing protests as well, live export protests, zoo protests, factory farming protests. In particular, with the dolphin captivity, I've also seen the actual sites of where possibly sea sanctuaries could be built in Australia. So I visited those sites and I've asked people as well what their thoughts are about it, especially Indigenous voices, understanding the Indigenous significance of subbed lands as well is something really important to consider.
Yeah. And, do you believe that there's a role in there for advocacy as well? So like working with government and things for trying to have a change from that level, not just from sort of the ground level?
It's absolutely needed that we get government support for a ban on dolphin captivity and for sea sanctuary retirements for dolphins. And Emma Hurst has done absolutely incredible in that space here in New South Wales. Emma Hurst, she established an inquiry into dolphin captivity in animal circuses, and that inquiry found that dolphin breeding should be banned and that no more dolphins should be born in a tiny concrete tank. And now that's the case. So no more dolphins can ever be born in captivity in New South Wales. However, the laws fall short on actually protecting the animals that are already in captivity. So those 3 dolphins, they will be the last captive born dolphins in New South Wales, but there is no sea sanctuary for them, and that's something that I'll be working to really push the government into financially supporting that.
And I guess like for people who may kind of wonder how that would work, like can you explain about I suppose the transition for these dolphins from captivity into like a sea sanctuary?
Yes. So these dolphins, they were born in captivity. They've been forced to perform their entire lives. They've never caught live fish before. And they definitely need to go under huge rehabilitation, even just before going into the sea pen. That could be things like changing the water temperature, getting them to do little bits and pieces as well while they're in the pools, actually really get them ready to be transported, even just learning how to actually, to be put into the slings to actually go into the sea pen, and just understanding what their stresses are and their cortisol levels as well is really important. But once they are ready for the sea sanctuary, it's incredible, and they can learn how to hunt live fish as well. And I've just seen so much about Rico Barry and what he's doing, particularly in Indonesia, and I think that can be a really big model here in Australia. but I don't believe the 3 dolphins in Coffs Harbour will be released back into the wild. I think it would just be a retirement for them. But I am actually hopeful for dolphins at SeaWorld on the Gold Coast, because they have dolphins which are captured from the wild or have been rescued. And these animals, I would really like to see if these are good candidates for release, because some of them have been captured from the wild, so they have hunt live fish before, and if we can teach them how to hunt live fish again, then that would be fantastic. But it's a long process. It's pricey, but governments should work alongside animal activists as well as industries like SeaWorld to get this in effect.
And, you know, where did your, I suppose, your passion for like marine life start? Like, was it something from an early age you enjoyed, like the beach and seeing animals in there, you know, in the ocean, or how, yeah, where did that begin?
Look, I actually think I started to really love dolphins and killer whales once I watched the documentary Blackfish. I had no idea about how intelligent these animals were. I had no idea how emotional they were, how family orientated they were, how much they're like us. The documentary Blackfish, hands down, gave me so much respect for these animals and taught me so much about these animals. I mean, I used to go to SeaWorld and these dolphin parks, and this 2-hour documentary taught me 300 times whatever SeaWorld is teaching people. So I think that documentary definitely turned me into a full-blown activist.
It's funny, you're the second or third guest now that suggested that, and I haven't watched it, so I'm definitely going to have to do that because, yeah, it's come up a few times now.
It's incredible. It's on Stan at the moment.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. And so you mentioned already, you know, there's obviously what you do for dolphins, but you also mentioned a number of other, you know, animal like protests and things you've been involved in. You seem to work with a lot of organizations. I'm guessing, you know, you find that whatever the issues are, you're happy to help. So I know you've helped like PETA and other organizations. I guess, yeah, you don't see any sort of competition there or anything like that. You're happy to go wherever animals are being, you know, protected.
Absolutely. If organisations align with my beliefs and what I'm passionate about, then I'm happy to help any organisation. I find PETA is great with their values for all animals, so I'm really supportive of their anti-animal experiment protests, their greyhound racing protests, their dolphin captivity protests, their farm cruelty protests, and with that World Animal Protection, I'm very happy with their policies against the exploitation of wild animals. And with Animal Justice Party, I'm thrilled by them, and I really support them, and so I make sure to attend those protests that they do as well. So I find the Animal Justice Party is the biggest threat to animal abusing industries as of right now. I firmly believe that the Animal Justice Party is the biggest threat for animal abuse.
Yeah. And so with PETA, you know, I know you've also been involved recently in like the human meat tray demonstration.
Yes.
Yeah, tell us about that.
So with PETA, along with Tash Peterson, we went to Pitt Street Mall in Sydney, and we laid almost naked in these meat trays covered in blood, wrapped in biodegradable plastic film, and you know, on our bodies, it was talking about how we're humanely slaughtered, and all this type of really confronting information about how many animals are slaughtered. And it was really cold. It was very confronting actually during the protest, but it raised so much awareness. Heaps of awareness was made.
Yeah. And so were people having conversations? Like, was there an opportunity there for outreach, or was it more about gaining the attention and then directing them like to PETA's website or?
Well, behind us in the meat trade, there were signs talking about veganism, and other people were linked to PETA's website to learn about how to go vegan.
Yeah, awesome. And the other thing as well, I think before that, which was also kind of, I suppose you could say controversial with PETA, is that you were doing a you were, I suppose, raising awareness about lab experimentation. And you were, being a drowned, was it a rat or a mouse? I think it was a mouse.
Yes.
Yeah. Tell us about that.
So we went to Bondi Pool, another really iconic Sydney destination, and we had mouse noses, and we were dressed in grey like a mouse, and we held up signs talking about how animals are being used in forced swim tests and how these are really cruel and barbaric, and that it needs to shut down. Pharmaceutical industries need to stop doing that. Universities need to stop doing that. And I'm really pleased that I believe it was Macquarie University have said, just as I think a couple of weeks ago, they will no longer do the forced swim tests. And that was after these protests and after PETA globally was pressuring them.
Okay. And so just explain, what's the purpose of the forced swim test?
So the forced swim test is simply terrible science. It's so unnecessary. So basically we have mice in these beakers and they are just desperate for air. It's just terrible science. There's no use for it. It's outdated, it's cruel. And really, I believe that these experiments are happening just to keep these animal experimentation breeders alive and keep these cruel, deadly scientists financially,
Yeah. And your most recent PETA protest, was that around greyhounds?
That was around greyhounds, yes. That was at Wentworth Park in Sydney, which is literally the heart of Sydney. And that was to protest that archaic, barbaric industry, which the New South Wales government said that they were closing down, but unfortunately backflipped because of, I think there were many reasons, but I think there was a lot of fear from politicians because of how disgraceful these monsters really are, not only to animals, but to people.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, here in Victoria, Andy Medic talks about it as well, is, the money, I suppose the money, the industry really has a lot of say in terms of, the conditions that they're keeping up the animals in, the greyhounds in, and also, the amount of times they can race them in a week or in a month, for example. So there's not a lot of, I suppose, regulation around the conditions compared to like horse racing. Obviously, they're all horrific, but it's really interesting that is even further behind, I guess you could say.
Yes, no, definitely. Greyhound racing is way further behind, but yes, horse racing is so cruel. But with greyhound racing, honestly, the New South Wales government has got all the information. They've even made posters about how cruel greyhound racing is when they announced the ban on greyhound racing, and it was a blood-soaked poster. It was saying greyhound racing kills dogs. So really, how we're going to ban greyhound racing is we have to keep up the pressure, and we have to have politicians like the Animal Justice Party that even if they actually have this fear, this fear from retaliation from these industries, that they're going to keep strong for the animals, because unfortunately there is a lot of fear. There is fear on touching industries which abuse animals because these people are dangerous.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because with greyhounds, the general population love dogs. They have dogs in their home. They understand, like we understand so easily their emotions and their intelligence. And so the general public is, is quite against the idea of it, but the government hasn't really backed itself.
Yes. And I'm glad that the ACT at least has, but you need all states to follow, and we need to hold politicians accountable for corruption.
Yeah. And your, I suppose you could say, circle of compassion also extends to, as you were saying before, about wildlife. So what are some of the activities you've been involved in with wildlife?
So there's been a lot of protesting for the koalas at the moment because they could become extinct and the government is not taking enough action to end species extinction. But we are also really focused on the slaughter of kangaroos as well, particularly with Nike. Nike is killing so many kangaroos for their soccer boots. So that's been a really big focus in protests as well. And I'm extremely confident that Nike will stop killing kangaroos and further embrace vegan materials. They already have many vegan shoes. So I don't see any reason why they can't really become completely vegan and stop killing all animals, including kangaroos.
How do you think the general public just weren't aware that, kangaroos are being slaughtered to make these boots? Like, do you think that was just not a commonly known thing, or?
I believe that Nike is purposely being misleading because in certain countries, especially in countries where there is a strong love for kangaroos, they have used the words K leather rather than kangaroo leather. So I believe that they are being misleading, and I think they are actually being very smart in their wording, but it's very misleading.
Yeah. And do you think with that campaign, do you think it's about a combination of like community pressure and I suppose, yeah, highlighting the regulations inadequate, or do you think it's about reform within the industry? Like what do you think is going to push that over the line?
I want the government to obviously stop this mass slaughter of kangaroos because these animals are going to become extinct. But I actually believe the power is going to be within certain actually celebrities, such as Billie Eilish. I think she's actually, she's an ambassador for Nike. She's made vegan shoes with Nike. She promotes vegan shoes with Nike. I would really like to see her stand up and say, Nike, stop killing kangaroos. And she's told that to other businesses to do with fur. So if she could extend her kind of policy to say, I'm not going to work with you if you're killing kangaroos, then I think that could really push Nike over the line. And I would love to talk to Billie Eilish about that because I think she could really get that on board. But I honestly believe it's going to be the pressure from prominent figures such as Billie Eilish in the plant-based movement.
Yeah, yeah. And as well, you've been involved in the drop crop campaign for Hermes.
Yes, that's right. So we held out bloody handbags to raise awareness about the slaughter of crocodiles and the barbaric crocodile farming that's happening. And thankfully, the project actually did a great segment about how cruel crocodile farming is and showed the undercover footage that animal activists had taken, which I was really happy about.
Mm. And with all these different types of activism you've done, whether it be disruptions or protests, are you generally, I suppose, met with confrontation, or are more people just, I suppose, surprised about what you're doing? Like, what's the general reaction you get?
Most people are really supportive when they see protests because they really want to learn the truth about what's happening to animals. And I think a lot of people, their minds are just blown about how much is being hidden to them to do with animal abuse, whether it be animal circuses, animal food, or experimentation. I think most people really appreciate people standing up for what they believe in and for trying to give them the truth about what's happening to animals.
Yeah. Do you think, that there's I suppose out of all the different forms of activism you do you think there's a better or a more effective way, or do you think they're all equally as effective?
I actually think it all depends on what the protest is and who the people are as well. So I think it's very different protesting greyhound racing. I think we need to be a lot more hard-lined with that. We need to show society that no, this is so wrong, and if you are doing greyhound racing, that is so shitty to do. It's beyond. But if we're talking about families going into SeaWorld, I think we need to be a bit calmer, and we need to be handing out the leaflets, telling people the information about why SeaWorld is cruel and how these animals are trapped as well, because when you think about it, people who are going to greyhound racing, a lot of them really just cruel people. But a lot of people who go to SeaWorld, they're not cruel people. They love dolphins. They just don't understand the information. So I think it really depends on what industry we're targeting and who we're targeting.
Yeah, it's a good point. And something else you're involved in as well is you're an ambassador for the plant-based treaty.
Yes.
Yeah, and tell us about that for anyone that hasn't seen what that's about.
So the plant-based treaty is so important. So we're trying to get as many politicians and councils to sign the plant-based treaty for a plant-based food system. So it's really the most important treaty at the moment, and we really, really need it in. It's great to have Emma Hurst on board with the plant-based treaty. I'm a youth ambassador as well, and so that means I'm doing YouTube videos and Instagram videos discussing the link between animal agriculture and climate change. And I really talk about the devastation of koalas and kangaroos to do with the bushfires.
Yeah. And so, you started activism from quite a young age.
Yes.
Do you think, did you find that challenging at all in terms of, being, I suppose, a little bit different to your peers or other kids are in your age group?
Honestly, I think I really just was so passionate that what anyone could say would never make a difference to me. I was always going to fight for the animals and speak the truth. And I just always, in my head, saw a victim, the pig, the dolphin, the fish, the chicken. So whatever anyone said to me, I was always going to fight. But I do understand that for many people, it could be really difficult to be so alone and to know this information and some people not care about it and be very dismissive. But for me, I always had the viewpoint that this is a numbers game. There are people who will say, I don't care about animal cruelty. Okay, we don't talk to these people. We talk to the people who say they do care about animal cruelty, and we give them the information. It's a numbers game. That is what the animal rights movement is about. So it's about getting as many people as we can on board. That doesn't necessarily mean everyone is going to be on board, and that's what we have to understand. But we just need a certain amount of people to really spark big change, and that's what I'm seeing with the Animal Justice Party. The Animal Justice Party is a very small party, but it's making such a huge difference with ending dolphin captivity. And just today, it was announced that Buddy's Law is coming in, which is going to free animals from experimentations. So we can make a big difference, even if we are in the minority. But we are in the majority of people who love animals, but minority are vegan.
Yeah. And so what would your advice be to activists in general, about starting out, or about, I suppose, even just, maintaining that ability to continue when things are tough, or if you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed?
Understand that we are going to win this fight. That's what you have to understand. Because every day that I fight, no matter how hard it is, I know that we are going to win. I know that SeaWorld on the Gold Coast will no longer exist. I know that horse racing and greyhound racing will no longer exist. I know that a plant-based food system is going to be the majority. It has to be. Otherwise, we're all going to die. So I know what the future is, and I know that you just have to keep on fighting hard. So what I would say would be, remind yourself of all the victories. Remind yourself of everything that's already been accomplished. Yes, it's slow. It's painfully slow, these victories, but they are victories, and you have to keep on fighting. But you also have to care about your mental health as well. So just do whatever you can with how you are.
Yeah. And how do you manage that for yourself? Do you do things outside of animal rights to balance that, your mental health and well-being?
I love nature and I love spending time with animals. So that's definitely a big thing. Particularly, I love snorkeling. I've really got into snorkeling. So I love seeing all the fish and the sharks and the stingrays, and it's just so peaceful. But I do admit that even when I'm swimming with them, I'm thinking, what could I do to save them? But I really love it. So I would say for everyone, connect to nature. Honestly, connect to nature, because just like how the animals in zoos and circuses want to connect to nature, we also really need to connect to nature as well.
Yeah. And I did actually just realize we sort of skipped over there about what your actual vegan journey was.
So with my vegan journey, I watched a YouTube video of pigs being slaughtered in an Australian slaughterhouse that was RSPCA approved, free range. That video was uploaded by Animals Australia. I clicked on it because I was curious. I'd understood about caged eggs and things like that. So I was wondering, how does pork get on my fork? So I watched the video and I was shocked and disgusted. And the great thing about this video is it made it clear that this is free range and that this is RSPCA approved and this is standard practice. And that's what I needed to know. Because if this is the best of the best, then this is disgusting and this is an industry I do not want to support.
And how old were you?
I would have been about 12 years old and I never ate meat ever again.
Oh, wow. And then did you transition to like get rid of dairy products, or did that happen all at once?
Very soon after, I watched the videos about the bobby calves and I stopped drinking milk and eating cheese and continued to embrace soy milk and plant-based milk alternatives. And then with eggs, I was a bit confused. I'm like, but free range eggs, what's the problem? And then I found out about the maceration of little baby chicks. So maybe the female chickens, if it's properly free range, they've got nice big space and, very nicely treated if they're not being killed. But those poor little boys, they're murdered. So I realized that there's no such thing as humane eggs and that these animals are bred to produce so many eggs as it is. So there was no humane way to exploit someone. So I ditched eggs as well. So really became vegan very, very quickly as soon as I knew the information.
Yeah. And then I'm guessing it wasn't too long after that you started activism.
Absolutely, yeah. So I started doing protests such as March Against All Slaughterhouses, and then, the dolphin captivity protests as well, and handing out leaflets. Like I was handing out so many leaflets for PETA about circuses and veganism, and I was putting them at supermarkets, meet your meat with cute little pig faces and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, very soon after.
And, I'm guessing you were, a teenager at this point. So was your family supportive of you going vegan?
Well, at first, I think they were very shocked. My mum actually told me, I don't really believe you. And she honestly did not think that I could possibly do it. She didn't really understand veganism. But now she's just like, how could anyone eat a poor little pig? And sometimes I feel like she's like a level 10 vegan compared to me. So yeah, it's great. But, at the beginning, was supportive with, helping me get vegan foods and stuff like that, but didn't quite think it was a long-term thing.
Yeah. And so does that mean your mum's vegan as well?
Yes, she is.
That's awesome. Could you say that was your doing?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And I think Instagram really helped as well, to get my mum to become vegan, because she would follow all these cute little pig pages. And so I was telling her about what's happening to the pigs, and she's liking these cute little pig photos, and I'm like, Mum, you're eating these little pigs. So I think definitely the cute little Instagram pig videos and photos definitely helped sway her as well, because they're very cute.
Yeah, that's awesome. And do you find that, now you mostly surround yourself, like friends and family that are vegan?
I would say it really just depends, honestly. Like I'll be friends with anyone as long as that they're doing something for the animals. So as long as they're moving towards the vegan way, then, I'm happy to be friends with them. I've got a lot of friends who are boycotting horse racing, not going to circuses. They're swapping, they're not vegan, but they're swapping their milk to oat milk to save cows. So things like that is great, and they're the type of people that I want in my life. Definitely, I'm only friends with people who are making changes for the animals and who have compassion for animals.
Yeah. And what's, in your future? Like, what are you working on, or what are you, I suppose, hoping, to do in the next, let's say, 5 years?
In the next 5 years, that is such an interesting question. I would say I would really love to just become maybe even more politically focused, would probably be what I would say. I would like to be more politically focused on these issues, because I'm just seeing how much success the Animal Justice Party is having in basically shutting down this animal abusing industry. So I think that is definitely one of the next steps.
It's funny that you say that, because when you were first talking about it, I did think to myself, oh, you'd be pretty incredible as a candidate in an election. So it might be something in your next steps.
Definitely something I'm definitely thinking about.
Yeah. Do you think it's important to have younger people in politics?
Absolutely. And I also think it's important because as a young person, I know that what the issues that young people are really passionate about. So yeah, I think it's really important, and we're the future. We're the ones that are going to change the world. So yeah, we need to get young people in politics.
Yeah, very true. Well, it's been incredible. Do you think there's anything that we have missed that you did want to mention?
I don't believe so, but I may just highlight that the Dolphin Park in Coffs Harbour, unfortunately, they are getting a lot less protests because they've changed their name to Dolphin Marine Conservation Park, whereas they were previously Dolphin Marine Magic. So that's something that we really need to understand, that just because people change their names, that we need to keep the fight until those dolphins are free. And myself, I want to put more pressure on them to empty the tanks.
Yeah. I think, there's always something, like, personally for me, I'm in Victoria. But I recently went up a couple of months ago, I went up and met Ange, and we did a protest at SeaWorld. And it's something, whether it be you can physically travel to an area to do a protest, or whether you put pressure on the government, like you were saying, by, writing emails, letters, signing petitions, like there's always something we can do, even if we're not local. So I think that's something really important to highlight on these issues.
Absolutely. Our voice is so important.
Yeah. Well, do you happen to have a favorite quote that you wanted to share?
Thou shalt not kill.
Makes sense. Yeah, very appropriate. Well, thank you so much, Bailey. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I look forward to seeing what's going to come up in your future, because it sounds like, there's definitely a lot that's happening. You already do so much. So I can't imagine how you're going to be able to fit any more in, but thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And I really love that you shaved your head for charity. Great work. Really appreciate all the work that you're doing.
Thank you. That's so kind. Thank you so much.